man solche Sachen dann auch beweisen.
Genau. Ja.
Aufzeichnung läuft. Hallo Annette.
Hallo ihr Lieben.
Hallo, freut uns, dich zu sehen.
Also ein
Mal
Schleimer.
wieder.
Ein Schleimer. Oh. Hat er gesagt, lass uns so noch ein bisschen länger draußen warten, hat er gesagt.
In der Kälte.
Ja. CrossFit Liberty.
Da sind schon mindestens 2 von uns.
Ich lasse mal von uns die Leute rein, um das mal sanft den Übergang zu machen. Jelena.
Warte mal, dann lasse ich den Sebastian auch noch rein, der gehört auch zu mir. So.
Raul, speicherst du die Aufzeichnung ab und schickst sie nachher rum?
Also nachher nicht, aber wir speichern sie auf jeden Fall ab, ganz genau. Jetzt lasse ich mal den 4958 einfach mal rein. Vielleicht ist es ja.
Das wäre ein Gag.
Das wäre ein Gag, ja.
Oder er hat jetzt einfach schon zu lange gewartet und hat gesagt, nee, also tut mir leid.
Anna von Innsbruck. Christine, lassen wir nachher schon mal. Jetzt komm. 495803.
Meinst du, der lässt da noch die Kamera aus? Für den mit anderen Special-Effekt.
Wehe. Ich glaube, irgendjemand kaut Kaugummi.
Ja, ich. Warte mal, der Laurens ist wieder da.
Im Warteraum sind es jetzt 50 Leute.
Mhm.
Ist er da, unser Stargast?
Man kann ja oben in der Suchfunktion eingeben und nach Teilnehmern suchen.
Nein, das ist immer noch nicht da. Schau mal, lieber Raul, ich muss leider absagen. Ja, angespanntes Schweigen.
Ja, ich gucke die ganze Zeit den Warteraum durch, ob ich irgendjemanden...
Ich würde sagen, wir lassen
Erzähl
jetzt...
doch mal irgendwas, Raul.
Wir lassen einfach alle mal schon mal rein. Du, wenn ich anfange, was zu erzählen, ihr wisst genau, dass das geht dann Stunde um Stunde.
Jetzt war's aber hier.
Stunde.
Pack alle auf einmal.
Jetzt kommen sie.
Wir sind doch eh alle nur wegen dir da, Raul, oder?
Ja, gab es heute ein anderes Thema?
Nee, eigentlich nicht. Aber dann können wir ja mal anfangen. Also zu mir.
Da ist er.
Ist er da?
Ja,
Da ist er ja. The Ready State. Oh. Na komm schon. Drückt da jemand außer mir drauf? Achso, ja.
Hab mal auf alle zudrücken.
Alle.
Alles rein jetzt.
Aber wirklich on time, Mr. Kelly Starrett. Very, very on time, on point.
Da ist er.
Da ist er. Unser garmischer Freund.
Ja, genau. Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen. Wie geht's dir?
Geht, was muss gehen, ja? How are you? How's everyone?
Not so bad. What about you, man? Nice to have you here. Wonderful.
You know, this is the first year in maybe 7 years where I haven't been in Germany. And there's a little part of my soul that's broken right now because of the lack of travel. So I'm going to say this is not the best thing. It's the only thing I have. So it's so great to see you.
Good to have you here, man. So, let's see. So, how was the trip to Germany this time?
I know because there was no trip. It's a little bit sad. So you know, I haven't had Obsta, I haven't had Kaiserschmarrn, I haven't had Dampfknudel. I mean, I'm basically just a shell of myself. It's very sad, and more importantly, my children are very sad. So you know, it's nice to see everyone. We've just gone into very serious lockdown here again in California.
Oh, you too?
So, gyms are closed. Everything is closed. Inside dining is closed. So it's it's back to the peak scariness again here.
Not good. But they just give you some support for this lockdown
Oh, no.
this time? Nothing.
Of course not. It's good. So I don't know if you all know, but our gym of 15 years has just closed. We closed 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago. So it's very sad that after 15 years we have little control, but there was no change in rent, and just we couldn't make do. And then we closed down, and then poop, no one can go inside again. So it's just not possible. It's too cold. It's too rainy. There's not enough space. So after 15 years, the San Francisco CrossFit is closed.
Wow.
Well, what are we talking about today?
It's up to you. It's you, the most important the person here in the room.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you're just waiting for me to talk about, why don't we do this instead of a formal presentation, which is terrible on Zoom? I'm very over it. What questions do you have? And perhaps we can go around and talk about what you're thinking about, how we think about fitness, how we think about our families, what we think about mobility and mechanics. Maybe we can just turn this into a forum. And I know that's a little bit difficult to manage, but it would be great to see or answer or work towards problems that you're all trying to solve. That way we can turn this into maybe a bit of a workshop and see what emerges from that. Is that okay?
Awesome. Let's do that.
All right.
We just work with the chat. So Lisa will start with an introduction. I guess now we have more than enough. We gave them more than enough time to start here with us. So yeah, let's start, guys. Yeah. Okay.
So
Lisa,
maybe Lisa can moderate, and then we can go around. So maybe you can raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. Perhaps we can use the chat that way, and I'll just we'll swing from there.
Yes. So in the previous calls, we had the problem that people were sending our guest messages that we couldn't see. So it was kind of hard for us to ask, and he had to stare at the screen. So maybe today we can put the questions in the chat so everybody can see it, so that also people see if their question might have been asked already. And then we will read them so that not everybody unmutes themselves and everybody's talking at the same time. Maybe we can then keep this organized enough so that everybody gets their questions answered.
Kein Problem.
Kein Problem. Good. So first of all, we agreed today that we are going to claim you. You're practically German. You grew up in Germany, so we're just going to claim you and make you one of us so that we have somebody to be proud of in this game.
Wie sagt man, wer die Wahl hat, hat die Qual. So,
Yeah.
No problem. You guys
Okay.
I'm already home.
Good. So first, most important thing is out of the way already. And then I'm just going to pamper you a little bit by saying that you have been called the celebrity and founding father of CrossFit. And 2017, you were named one of the 100 most influential people in health and fitness. And then speaking from my own experience, we have your book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, in German and English at the box. Every day we prescribe.
Shit. Du musst, versehentlich habe ich dich gemutet.
And then I got muted.
Yeah, it was me, sorry.
Yes, I think everybody started with your book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, and is still using it. I don't think we need to introduce you much further to anybody here because the first questions are already coming in. And Philip von Adlevel would like to know, what is your strategy to motivate kids that are being at home at the moment to get them moving again?
Ooh, this is a tricky one. So I have two daughters. I have a 12-year-old and an almost 16-year-old. And currently, they're both able to go to some water polo they play a little bit. But the key, I think, around the children is that for us, we can jump into a class. That's enough. It feels good to move. We appreciate that. But for children, it is absolutely about play. And the problem is fitness at home has no play in it. It feels like eating vegetables or doing housework. And so the first and foremost is to think, what is the sort of minimum that we can do? Well, we can walk if that's possible, to try to hit minimum steps and to gamify it. Getting a tracker can make a difference for motivating kids. And then one of the things that we have done is that we have created an environment where our children move more. So our kids are at standing desks with a stool that they can lean on. And so how do we shape the environment so that we're getting more movement or more input into the child is really one of the things. I'm right now talking with you, but my laptop is on a portable desk that can sit on a table or sit on the floor. So even by constraining the environment in which our children are learning, maybe not sitting at the table, but sitting in the living room on the floor, we're getting more movement. They're having to change positions and fidget. They have to get up and down. So the first thing we can do is say, how can we constrain the environment to have a slightly different outcome instead of adding more things back in? Second is that if you don't grab and go for a walk with the children and leave the children to do what they will on their own, they won't engage. And so I think you have to be thinking, how do we engage ourselves together? And then, there has to be picking up things like dancing on the internet, TikTok dance. One of our favorite dancers is a guy named the Fitness Marshal. And the Fitness Marshal does these just follow dance along fun videos that we throw up all the time. If there's one other family that's close where you can create so kids can do work together, I think this is part of it. But I think what we have to ask right now is sort of, what can we control? Let's control what we can control. And we have to, just let the rest of it fall. So your kids' elite fitness may fall if they're not front squatting and in CrossFit kids classes or playing, but we have to be thinking about, first and foremost, how do we constrain the environment? And second, how do we create more movement sort of structured into the day? And I think that's a really, really tricky question right now because, this isn't good for anyone's development. Let's start with the assumption that the brain is a social organ. The brain doesn't work unless it's around other brains. So if the human being is the most sophisticated structure in the known universe, the brain is the most sophisticated organ in this most sophisticated structure, you have to appreciate that when we pull brains apart, the brain no longer works. So always keeping the context of play and socialness together is really the heart of intrinsic motivation that kids want to do. And I think, in our garage, we have lots of things that they can do. We have watt bikes and assault bikes and rowing machines and pull up, but it's not very fun. So, part of what we have to say is, hey, like when my young children, my 12-year-old has been on school all day, the very minimum, we go for a walk in the neighborhood. We have a big ridge that we walk, and she has to do 100 kettlebell swings. So this is just like brushing her teeth, right? And it's not very fun. But as soon as we can always get together and play a little bit, I think this is the key. So I think first, constrain the environment, try to trick the body into moving as much as possible, just having to sort of engage in the day instead of, I only sit at the kitchen table and only work there. And I think this is an easier way to do one less push. Hopefully that answers that. What else do we have?
Okay. Speaking of kids, it's more about teenagers now, but how do you feel about weightlifting and teenagers? And do you have some great approach for the parents that are scared that their kids will face future issues after weightlifting?
Yeah, well, it's not interesting that there's still stigma. So if you know Jeff and Mickey Martin, they are the founder of Brand X Kids, and they are the originators of CrossFit Kids. But they have on their website and lots of research showing and demonstrating how safe movement weight training is for children. One of the things that I think, believe it or not, I think Germany was one of the countries in the Olympic lifting groups that assigned a clean and jerk score, a snatch score, and also a technique score. So what we always appreciate is we emphasize technique, and speed and play, and then those things come. So those maximal deadlift loads, those things are silly for children anyways, because the children just aren't that strong. But it's very interesting when you hand the kids a couple dumbbells, how parents think that's okay, or a kettlebell, but when you hand them a barbell, everyone starts to freak out a little bit. So one of the things you can do is is there is so much good training to be done with a single dumbbell or a single kettlebell. And I would actually push you to look at and speak about strength training as really coordination training with young adults. And that especially when we are appreciating that, I think originally with children, our old model, and certainly the model I grew up with in Germany, the thing that we saw was kids who did the most sports and were the best at the most sports, skiing and biking and kayaking and soccer and all the other things we did, that person was the queen, the person who did everything. And then we could layer in a little bit of formal movement training in there. And now what we see is that kids are either doing nothing or they're doing only one thing. And we're having to teach kids a whole bunch more because they're not exposed. So one of the things that I think is a useful way to encourage and assuage and help parents not be scared about their children is when we use it as a diagnostic tool, when we can identify incomplete hip range or stiffness. And so suddenly parents are realizing that this very much looks like, hey, I see that your child's a swimmer, but she can't put her arms over her head, right? And we don't have to get in sort of an intellectual shouting match about, well, your children is playing soccer or football, so that's so much loading on a single leg. When we remove the barbell from the equation, all of the conversation goes out the door. And so once parents see their children moving well with dumbbells, moving well with kettlebells, using the techniques of, I would push everyone here to look at the work of Frans Bosch. I believe he's Dutch, and he has some really wonderful books. His most recent book is The Anatomy of Running, but his other book is called like Coordination and Strength Training. And when we begin to look at the gym as skill development, then all of a sudden, and it starts to look like games, it starts to feel like games, we see parents not very freaked out. As soon as it's heavy bench press, parents get very worried. So push-ups in children is okay. Bench press with children, very scary. And so suddenly we can see that there's so many ways to have a good stimulus around gymnastics and body weight control. I think we can sidestep that. And then eventually the natural progression towards the barbell is already there, and it's easy because parents have seen that their children are safe. They've had the experience that their children are safe and that their children are actually getting better and the children are asking for the advanced training. So sometimes, we don't have to make the case. We have some parents, and then some parents are afraid. We just we sneak into the background of the conversation a little bit slower. So 100% of our teams and handle barbells, of course, because it's such a safe way to manage it. And what we always say is also that once parents realize that the child, especially when we focus on speed elements and speed activities, and we have isometrics and good control, and we often will have parents hang out and watch a few sessions, and then all of a sudden it's no problem. So hopefully that answers. And it's probably consistent with your experience there, I think. And then let's see. Do you want to keep answering the questions?
Sure. I tried to find a good connection to the previous question. Maybe we start with the last question first about a mobility warm-up in group training. Is it possible to really assign one size fits all, or do you have to be a little more individual in your approach?
What's very interesting about that is we're in a CrossFit environment here traditionally, this group of people. And one of the things that we know is, well, we only program one workout for the class today that's based on a movement idea or a skill practice piece, right? The goal today is to squat with your torso upright. That could be a goblet squat, a Zercher squat, a front squat, those kinds of things. And what we see is that suddenly we can scale up and down based on everyone's needs, right? In the context of that workout idea or that movement idea. If we go into training like in thinking it's just a bunch of work and exercise, that's a problem. Every day it should be organized around what are the positions that I value, or what positions am I working on with my athletes? And I can challenge those positions. So in our language, we speak of the archetype, and the archetype are sort of the bookends, the end ranges of motion where we need to have control, and they represent sort of the capacities of the body expressed across any movement. So The shoulder has overhead, the shoulder comes into extension, the shoulder has to be in the front rack, the shoulder has to be in the hang. But then you can also do all of those things with bent arm or straight arm, right? Bent arm or straight arm, bent arm or straight arm, bent arm or straight arm. And what you see suddenly is that we can explain the start positions, finish positions, or the movements of the body in the context of these archetypes. And what that means then is that when we go in and train, we're really training positions. And then what we're really doing is challenging the robustness of position and the ability to maintain that position under speed, under load, under cardiorespiratory demand, under metabolic demand, under stress conditions, right? So there's a whole lot of ways, you know, I can go open torque, closed torque, I can make it closed chain, open chain, I can do a block practice, a random practice. You see that there's so many ways for me to challenge your ability to do what? One push-up, right? Run around the block, do one push-up. Let's put weights on your back, do one push-up. Let's make it suddenly open chain, and now it's a bench press. Let's make sure that you're rowing in that position. You're pushing and pulling, you're approximating the joints and compressing the joints. So once you begin to look underneath the programming and say, well, we haven't, and you get beyond, well, we haven't pressed overhead or push press for a minute, what you're really seeing is, oh, the push press is what we're challenging this overhead position by adding speed to the press, right? So, but the root positions remain relatively the same. So when we program, we would sit down and say, what are the positions we're trying to improve? And are we touching these positions? Have we taken the hip into extension? Are we working on single leg control? Then all of a sudden, we realize that everyone needs those things. So generally, our general warm up is to get people hot and sweaty, to get people, you know, feeling like they're members of a community. We play, we jump rope, we do breath holds, we do animal flow on the ground. We really encourage our coaches to take the warm up time and try new things they saw on the internet, new warm up games, getting people to hop around and do silly things. We play tug of war, right? There's many different sort of variables into the warm up as we can, with the idea of generally trying to raise body temperature, prepare the nervous system, get people to belong to each other and feel good in the class, right? But also we need to do some specific preparation for the movements that we're doing. So if we do a general warm up, but we don't actually put our arms over our head and we're going overhead today with push-ups or with pull-ups and something else, this will lead us to an incomplete position. And so one of the things that we're always trying to do is making sure that there's some element of assessment in the warm-up relative to the thing that we're trying to do. So we don't train the whole body every day. We may do some kind of warm up like the shoulders spin up or some kind of hip ground flow, or we're touching extension, or we're touching internal rotation, we're doing some kind of movement of the hip or movement of the shoulder generally, but we don't train every energy system. We don't train every body part. We don't train every movement. So our warm up doesn't have to include that. And so what we want to do as a coach is I want to already know where all my problems are with my athletes in the context of group warm-up. And so as soon as we do downward dog, and I do one arm downward dog, and I see people's elbows bend and they're missing, you know, their ability to extend and they're in terrible positions, I have an idea of what's going to happen when we go overhead today, because I've already seen them in another overhead position. So that means that specifically I can use my warm-up suddenly to design and make sure that I'm touching these positions, but then we get more closely organized as a class to say that today's training is a diagnostic tool. And if you were lacking overhead positioning or struggled in overhead positioning during the class, I may give you dumbbells. I may slow you down. I may limit your range when you start to compensate, right? We have really strong guys who have incomplete position, and this is the end of their overhead press. We don't let them get into terrible positions and achieve some fake end range position. The same way we don't let people say, well, it's okay to round your back when you lift because it's the only position you can get in. We move people up off the ground. So we can scale our movements to make sure that the person is getting the best quality movement available to them in that motion, in that minute. We've warmed up them, prepped them, and have an understanding of those end ranges in the mobility warm-up kind of component of range of motion. And then afterwards, we have a perfect opportunity to get the whole class working on an overhead position. So suddenly there's real sort of through experience where people are warming up, being assessed in real time. right? Working on skills, they're developing a strength and conditioning practice in the context, and then the post warm down, maybe, hey, let's work on the position we were trying to sort of highlight for the day. And if we're highlighting multiple positions for the day, that's okay. We're going to choose the one where the people have the most problem, which may be an archetype or a body part. Or so suddenly what you see is that we have very high specificity of restoring people's range of motion in the context of the group class. And of course, you know, if people come in and they are hot messes, right, then we may need to expose them to some more individual time afterwards. But in short, you know, I think if you can go ahead and say we're doing group training, then you have to also say, well, then it's going to be non-specific for everyone. And also you won't solve everyone's problem with that group training. And in the mobility section or the warm-up, we're going to do the best we can, but then we're going to consummate and complete the cycle at the end of the session. Does that make sense?
Yep. And in addition to this, maybe a good question for more like the mental side to it. Like if somebody has been injured and he's like going through rehab, still wants to train, and you kind of have to find that small path between slowing him down so that he doesn't get hurt anymore, but still keeping him engaged. So.
Why are you saying him? Why are you saying that women don't do this, just men?
I can say it. I don't know, to keep it neutral.
So I will say women have egos too. One of the things is that we want any athlete who's had surgery or has been injured to stay with our classes. And we have no problem bringing the bike over or giving them a separate workout that respects their healing time, but we keep them in the group class. We can use the structure and timing. We can use the couplets. And what we find is if someone has twisted an ankle in sport, there's still 100 other things this person can do. They're going to do single leg deadlifts and single leg step ups. And they're going to, you know, so the first and foremost, if someone is in an acute stage, they should be being followed and being programmed by a physio, hopefully. And if they're not seeing the physio, then it's up to us to say, well, okay, here are the guidelines. And this is why we feel like, and we have spent a lot of time working on trying to get strength coaches a little bit more sophisticated, and why our 101 and level 2 programming is helping us understand this. And we're starting our level 3, which is training injured athletes. And notice that I say training, not rehab. Rehab happens inside a physio facility, inside the doctor's office. Training is what athletes do, even though that they're injured or have had a surgery. They're still continuing to train. And so instead of helping modulate the tissues, we need to make sure that our coaches understand principles. And it may be slowing down. It may be partial range of motion in those things. So, you know, if someone has had a shoulder injury, they may be pressing, you know, a 5 kilo dumbbell, and then the other side is a very heavy dumbbell. That's okay. We just suddenly can control those things in the context that we have. But what you're seeing is that the fundamental, I think, interesting aspect of this question is that who is responsible for this? It's the coach and the athlete together having a conversation, because the physio is not in the room. The doctor is not in the room. And until the doctor or the physio are part of the daily training of the person who's training through an injury or after surgery, this conversation will always default to us and our control. So, I mean, they can shout at us from the outside, which means that we have to be much better at understanding what it is we're trying to do as coaches. And I would suggest, for example, that if you go to our YouTube channel or Instagram channel, you can see in the last several weeks, especially since I've just had a big knee surgery, I talk about healing, I talk about adaptation, I talk about decongestion, which I think are all components of the training experience. So the gym, I believe I want to expand the role of the gym, expand the role of the trainer and the coach, and also educate the athlete to be able to be much more sophisticated. When we need to get help, we get help if it's a serious medical condition or pathology, but the rest of it has to happen. And when we set up some basic rules, shouldn't hurt, you can't hurt tomorrow, et cetera, then, and we have movement goals in that context of restoring people's normative range of motion, then all of a sudden that this conversation becomes a lot less sophisticated and a lot less complex.
Okay, speaking of this, Tom was much more considerate than all of us because he asked how your personal leg rehab is going right now.
Well, you know, so if you don't know, about 7 years ago, I grew up in Garmisch, raced as a kid, raced FIS. You know, I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder and skied and skied and skied. I've been skiing since I was 2 years old. I love to ski. And 7 years ago, I was skiing very fast and I was racing a stranger, and had my butt on the ground going, you know, probably 90 kilometers an hour. And I slid, and just like a million times, I slid out in the ski cot, and I put my femur into my tibia, and I have these 2 gigantic holes in my femur and in my tibia. And so it was a bad sprain. I didn't hurt any of the soft tissue, but I definitely ruined those 2 joints and destroyed my meniscus. And I went and saw a doctor and got an MRI after a few months, and they were like, oh, you should get your knee replaced in the next 6 months. And I was like, I don't think so. So what I was able to do was manage my severe mechanical injury for 7 years until I realized that I wasn't squatting. Riding my mountain bike was starting to bug me. I was deciding not to run. Double unders were gone. Too many things had come off the table. So I went and had my knee resurfaced or replaced 6 weeks ago. And now I'm 6 weeks out and making slow and steady progress. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm pumping my leg right now. There's my leg. I'm on the Mark Pro, doing my rehab as I talk to you guys, taking care of the tissues. And what we see is, and this is what's really important, the revolution that's coming for us is that we don't, traditionally in rehab exercises and classic rehabilitative medicine, they use a correlate language of movement. They do things that look a little bit silly, like they're rehab exercises. They're very low level. They're designed to babysit the tissues. And that's predominantly because strength and conditioning coaches have never been physios. That hasn't really happened. And doctors weren't engaged with traditional strength and conditioning like we see in our gyms. And one of the things that we've found now is that I don't have to have lots of corrective exercise. So with the full caveat that Gray Cook is one of my best friends, I believe in the power of corrective exercise. I love the FMS, but I personally don't use any corrective exercise. My corrective exercise is kettlebell swing, deadlift, tempo, front squat, back squat, single leg, step up. I have enough work to do by slowing the movements down in the context of the regular training I do. And so what that means is that every coach or every athlete already speaks the movement language, and it's the same movement language that we train in. All we're doing is scaling it down. So just like someone is a beginner, we slow them down, watch their volume, have them manage their speed, right? Work on control, right? Well, I just take that further. Now I have to protect the tissues, keep the range of motion limited, slow it down, watch the volume. And what we see suddenly is that we already have a perfect training language, which is not a correlate language. And so we end up capturing the imagination, and it's much more fun because our athletes realize, oh, I realize what I'm doing here. I'm doing tempo box squats to a high box. And that's the same thing as me now working my way back up to recovery versus I'm doing lots of rehab exercises that have nothing to do with my training. Does that make sense? So I think that we have a real opportunity to leverage our experience as strength coaches and, more importantly, as athletes as we solve this. So for me, this has been very interesting because, you know, I have worked with thousands of athletes who've had surgery and been injured, but this is my first real surgery ever. And I have seen the bigger holes in between what the doctors are saying in the traditional medical community and where we go. So even though I'm at week 6, I'm really at week 12 in terms of what I can do. I'm doing dead December. I can jump rope. I can push a prowler. I have, all of the things that I just do it very slowly. And usually I make it a Metcon where I have a bike and then a deadlift, or a bike and then an air squat, or a bike and then a strict press. So I've pulled out the speed and I'm working on the positions and the mechanics and then gone back to the roots of CrossFit, which is how do I challenge position? Well, I can challenge it not just with load, but with cardiorespiratory demand and metabolic demand. And right, there's all of the tools that we have to make challenge position. We can do that with injury as well.
Okay, and then another question about your personal routine. Lawrence is asking especially about breathing manners that you probably or might do in the morning. And he wants to know if really, I think conscious breathing in the morning is kind of like a game changer for mindset and health.
So when we look, one of the things that I think is very confusing, especially as being sort of modern athletes, is that we have access to the internet. And we have access to every tool, every training modality, everything. You know, I use club bells. This is my animal flow kingdom. I'm a CrossFitter. I'm a powerlifter, right? We have all of these very, very interesting and competing ways to train the body. And that's fantastic. Pilates, yoga, dance, whatever it is you like to do. So when we try to say, what is the pieces, what are the elements, pieces that I can say are foundational, the breath control is foundational. So for example, let's do a little test, everyone, shall we? So don't move where you are. Don't move. You sat up. I saw you. Don't sit up. I saw you. Valerie, lean forward again. So stay where you are and take the biggest breath you can. Show me you can take a big breath here where you are. So how much air can you get in? We can measure this. Go ahead and take a big breath. Don't move. I saw that. Dominic, don't move. So how much air can you get in? Okay, now get into a position where you can take more air in. Go ahead. Adjust your position. So now look what happened. I didn't say sit up. I didn't say adjust your pelvis. I didn't say pull your rib cage down or head back. I just said get into a position where you can breathe better. And look what automatically happened. Because you have this feeling of being able to maintain your capacity, I suddenly gave you a tool to adjust position and efficiency of your body without ever having to coach you or say something or take into your individual differences. So suddenly we're all in much better positions. Well, if I translate that into, can you take a breath on the squat? Can you breathe on the bike? Can you get in the rower in that position? Can you breathe in yoga? We're doing mobility and you can't breathe in this position. All of a sudden we appreciate that our ability to maintain the quality of our breath can help us understand positions. So let's do another test. Let's have everyone stand up for me. Please, everyone stand up. This is so good. Das tut mir leid. There we go.
This is kind of how it started with Mike, and he had us do 8 minutes of burpees. So I think everybody is a little cautious right now.
a little, it's okay. So all I want you to do is take the biggest breath in you can. We can measure this. How much Sauerstoff, I think that's the right word for oxygen. How much air can you get into your body right now? So in through the nose, biggest breath in you can. Fantastic, let it go. Okay, now watch this. That is how much air you can move, right? You're in good position based on this. Now, what I want everyone to do is to put their arms over their head and do the yoga finger gun. Do that. So arms over your head. This is full range of motion. Now let's test you again. Can you move the same amount of air in? Take the same big breath. Go. Was it bigger or smaller? Because it should be the same. Now, arms up again. Bitte schön, Tom. Thank you. And now go ahead and do an overhead squat for me. Go ahead and squat all the way down. Feet straight. Geradeaus mit Ihren Fuß bitte. And now hold that position and notice what you did. You stopped breathing, didn't you? You went right down there and held your breath. So show me you can take 5 big breaths in that bottom position. Go ahead, 5 big breaths. Is it the same? I see a lot of bellies. Good. Bauchbild, a lot of belly pictures here. It's very good. Stand back up. Okay, have a seat. Let's talk about that for a second. So notice the first thing that you did to simplify the system is that you went to the bottom and you stopped breathing. So this is a problem. This is one of the reasons we challenge so much of our load in CrossFit with conditioning, because we see that if I force you to take a breath and to breathe hard, you'll have to breathe in that bottom position. If I have you do more than 5 reps, you're going to figure out how you breathe and move at the same time. But most of us went right down and just dropped right into a breath hold. which means that your brain is like, I don't like this position. I don't own this position. And so one of the things that we can then further say is, not only should I be able to own that position by breathing, but my volume shouldn't change under body weight. My arms aren't connected to my diaphragm and should be working independently of my diaphragm. It may be harder, but I should be able to almost get, we say 90%, 95%. As I bring my hip up to my chest, that shouldn't take my pelvis and change. I shouldn't have to yank on myself. I just move my range. And so what suddenly you saw was that in that bottom position, where I asked multiple demands of your nervous system and your range of motion, the first thing that went away was your cardiorespiratory capacity, your ability to ventilate efficiently. So this is one of the reasons we put breathing through all of the work that we do, whether it's mobility, mobilizing, whether it's working on positional capacity on the bike. Like we said, can you breathe in? Can you get more air in? Whether we're talking about pressurizing with our Olympic lifters, right? What we see is that when we're able to get the breath in, we have much better control of the brain and we have much better control of the body. So it's a very simple way of improving the system, but that's why we obsess about breathing and making sure that our athletes are breathing all the time. So the next time, let's say you're skiing, you'll see that a lot of times people are skiing and they're going from breath hold to breath hold, right? Next time you do pull-ups, see if you're breathing while you do pull-ups, and you'll realize you're taking a breath, doing a bunch of pull-ups, taking another breath. And that's a really terrible way to run a marathon, going from breath hold to breath hold. So the idea here is, yes, we think that a breath practice is part of the experience of moving lymph through your body, keeping the thoracic spine moving, decongesting the neck and head, getting you CO2 tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. There's a million reasons why we should be focusing on the breath as the first diagnostic for whether we own a position or how competent we are in our movements.
Okay, speaking of marathons, there was a question from Dominic earlier that he heard the rumor that you finished an ultra marathon by breaking it up into 5-mile runs. And he wants to know, how does it work? Probably mentally more than physically.
Well, let's just say that I wasn't very fast, but I did run an ultra, and it was only a 50K mountain ultra. So just not crazy 100 miles, 200 miles. You know, what was interesting is that I really focused on efficiency and economy. I was very, very CrossFit fit. And then I just exposed the tissues to these 5 and 10K repeats a lot. And what I can say is I was able to do it, but certainly if you want to run well and fast, you're going to have to spend a lot more time running. You're going to have to, like we've seen this even in the CrossFit Games, how much people are running, how much they're swimming, how much they're biking. So my predominant sport is mountain biking. And, you know, we spend hours and hours and hours doing that. And of course, the more time you do it, the more effective you are. But if the goal is to create a fitness that is really reasonable and qualitative, then we have to have some exposure. And what you see is that you can survive it, but you won't do well at it. And I think that was what I was trying to do with the marathon, because I'm not a marathon runner, but I wanted to go have this experience and I wanted to come out unharmed. And so that's what we focused on. So again, I was very slow, but I also came back and trained the next Monday. And now I don't ever have to run an ultra again. So I'm done.
One and done. There's a question going back to the breathing. How or what do you think about the Wim Hof method of breathing and being exposed to the cold?
So Laird Hamilton is one of my best friends. I can see my cold tank from here. I have a sauna in the back of the house. I'll turn this around. You guys can see my yard. There's the ice tank. There's the sauna. There's my 4-meter swimming pool and 4-meter deep swimming pool. And so we do a lot of breath work and we do a lot of exposure around heat and ice. So we just think that this is a wonderful way to add stimulus to the system. What I think sometimes gets missed around Wim Hof, and Wim is such a wonderful entree in or way into this breathing experience for people. But then quickly you realize you can discover the Buteyko method, oxygen advantage, and there's so many XPT, there's so many ways where you can turn it up and turn it down and really go into sort of different aspects of the breathing. But I integrate some kind of breath practice into all my warm-ups, into everything that we do. So we're big fans. I took the basic Wim Hof template, and that actually is the basis for how the first thing we teach everyone who has low back pain, for example, is that, or neck pain, for example, is we get them breathing, doing 2 minutes of this super ventilation on a breath hold, then a breath hold, but we focus on the mechanics also, not just the physiology of changing the blood or getting luminous, right? So there's so many more ways where we can tweak that up and down, but we are gigantic fans of that and have found real success in our athletes in improving their position, improving their efficiency. In fact, what we've all discovered now, and I've been doing this kind of breathing for almost 6 years or so, is that I can now hit over 90% of my max heart rate nose only breathing, which is pretty crazy. And that I never ever over breathe during effort. Now I don't ever gas out. What ends up happening is I'm just not strong enough to catch up with my lungs in anything that I do. So I don't over breathe. I breathe hard, but once I go through, nose, mouth, mouth, even, I never gas out anymore during workouts. I just have to stop because my legs aren't strong enough on the rowing machine, for example, which is really fun. So we appreciate that, you can talk about the brain, you can talk about the physiology, you can unwind trauma, you can circulate, again, move the organs, non-threatening input into the spine. There's so many ways in, but looking at movement as the first, looking at breath as the first movement around the spine. And well, that fits in with what we think about training. We all agree that good training works from the core to the skeleton, right? To the arms, from core, we say core to sleeve. It works from axillary skeleton to peripheral skeleton. So we all define functional movement as beginning and originating with the spine and then moving outwards. Well, then we should just be looking at the movement and stabilization and compression around the spine. And that means breathing. So I think we didn't appreciate all the powers that breathing potentially gave us, but it's a crucial piece to improve your performance. And, in the ice, for example, my daughters will get cold and we just focus on them breathing in the ice, right? We don't focus on time, we make them breathe, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many ways to integrate this, but we're gigantic fans. And whoever speaks to you, again, you don't have to be Wim Hof only, but what you should be seeing is where are the overlaps and which person gives you the best control.
Okay, speaking about core to extremity and core control, probably, how do you feel about the American kettlebell swing for general population people, bringing the weight all the way overhead with maybe lacking core stability?
I don't even know what an American kettlebell swing is. There's either the swing which stops right here at the shoulder height, and there's nothing else. And the reason we stop the swing here is that as soon as I make the kettlebell heavy enough, you stop swinging it over your head. So if you want to go over your head, you get a kettlebell snatch or a kettlebell press, right? But what we see is that the overhead position ends up being not, if we use the definition of CrossFit of doing more work, and I got into a big fight with Greg Glassman about this a long time ago, no work is actually being done here. It's just momentum. And so what we actually see is that from here overhead back down, there's little connection. So we see horrible jerking. People can't create rotation in the shoulders. They can't be organized. We think it's a terrible movement. We don't do any of those swings in our gym ever. And so as soon as someone complains that they want to do American kettlebell swings, I give them 2 kettlebells and I say, let's do it. And then they stop again. Or I give them a very, very heavy kettlebell. And once again, they can no longer swing it over their head.
Okay, before I ask the next question, I would like to encourage people to ask more questions because we still have some time. And Philip wants to know, which 3 principles would you have given yourself 10 years ago when it comes to training? 3 easy rules to follow.
Oh, 3 easy rules. It's so simple. You have to sleep more. You're lying about how much sleep you're getting. All of you, you do not sleep enough. I know it. And you have to prove it to me. So one of the things that anytime I'm working around performance, so world-class athletes, Olympians, or injury, I make people show me their sleep. They have to track their sleep because I can't really tell what's going on with complex problems and performance outcomes if you're not sleeping. So that's a big deal. We believe strongly in that. I would say that we don't need to fear carbohydrate. I think carbohydrate is a miracle. And, focusing on food quality first is always the first goal. And, and so something like the 800-gram challenge where we eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables and try to hit your protein goals every day. I think those nutritional pieces are really important for the long haul. We believe in a lot of walking. Even if you're training really hard, you need to be walking. We want that our athletes hit the 10,000 steps a day. And some of that is because I think when, the way I look at sort of the movement system, I take apart the components of the movement system. I say, is this a system? This is a systems approach. I say, is this a sliding surface problem? Is the fascia not mobilized? Do we have high stiffness in the system? Are nerves not running through the nerve tunnels? Is the skin stuck to the tendon? This is why we scrub and we voodoo floss and we move in the way we roll, right? Then we say, well, is this a muscular dynamic system? Is there some aspect of the muscle control, whether it's breathing or length tension relationship or stiffness, that we can control? That's why we do lots of contract relax. We do lots of isometrics in our program. Then we say, well, is this a joint capsule problem? Because if I don't account for the joint capsule, I can still be missing 50% of someone's range of motion. So when you see people say things like, I have the ultimate hip mobility program, and it's just a lot of movement, you may be missing one of the components that's limiting that. And then maybe not be, it may be actually a movement control system. So movement quality does matter. And this is why we teach technique in all things that we do as human beings. We teach technique in riding with children. We teach technique in driving. We teach technique in bike riding. There's technique involved in nearly everything that we do. So one of the things, again, we're trying to say is, hey, you can move a lot of ways. You can drive a lot of ways. You can ride your bike a lot of ways. But there is a way that respects your physiology the most, where you can get the most wattage, the most poundage, the most output. So we have this joint capsule sliding surface, muscle dynamic system, movement system. But then we also have this environmental system, which is sleep. And do I feel safe? And am I a member of a tribe? And do I eat whole foods? And do I warm up and cool down? And do I downregulate and breathe? All of those things are as important, but who controls and owns these things? And so initially it's much easier to work on heavy front squat technique and, joint capsules. But what I'll say is that for the long progress, long haul, we cannot forget this environmental piece. And one of the reasons, for example, that we believe so much in the power of walking is that we see a lot of people have sleep problems and they can't fall asleep very quickly. They're not fatigued enough, even though they train during the day. But also that walking creates enough non-exercise activity where our athletes actually accumulate fatigue and will fall asleep. For children, this is really important. But also we have to just move the fluids in the body, and that's done through muscle contraction. So if you want to have legs that are really fresh, you have to walk to decongest the legs. So suddenly those principles, I think, when I'm a 29-year-old athlete versus being a 47-year-old athlete, these environmental principles are a lot more important. But it turns out all of my world champions who are 22 now do all of these environmental things better than we did, and they are faster and more durable, can do more work. So, again, layering in the breath first, really looking at positional quality first, and position as limiter, because the problem is you're actually a human being, which means that if I say, I need you to walk 200 kilometers tonight, you're like, okay, it's going to suck, but I can do it. And instead of, saying, hey, let's train until you've lost position. Let's train until you've lost coordination. So really being limited by our technique and having clear understanding of what the beginning of compensation looks like. We don't front squat until you've jumped the weight. We front squat load until your arches start to collapse and your back starts to soften and your knees start to come in and you can't breathe. Then we know that we've reached your limit. So I would say that, focus on these environmental pieces, and then real limitations are really understanding how the body begins to compensate to solve a problem. those two things mean that we can continue to train really, really hard, really, really heavy for almost indefinitely through our lives.
Okay, and then I kind of forgot about one question about your daily routine, or do you create like topics for your days to target your weaknesses, to not forget about them, or is it sleeping, walking, eating?
Well, you know, it's a really the foundation. So one is that one of my friends, Eric Cressy, who is an incredible strength coach, recently, I think yesterday, put out on the social, he was like, it's really hard to be lectured by 24-year-olds about their perfect chai latte routine and gratitude journal practice when they don't have children, they don't have a job, they don't have like real things to do. So, you know, the routine for us, we try to appreciate that in the morning we have control, we go to work, there's a lot to get done, and then we have some control in the evening again. And so, you know, what I'll say is that we really do focus on trying to eat whole foods. We try to move our bodies every day in some way. Sometimes, you know, I really like to train. I really enjoy heavy, hard training, but also I really listen to, so in my background of my movement selection, I think to myself, have I hit this position this week? I need to make sure I'm doing that, right? You know, if I haven't done pull-ups or pull-ups are missing, then pull-ups get put into what I do for the day or built into the couplet and triplet. So usually I have my training looks like there's one move and then a couplet or triplet of some assistant exercise or some conditioning, or there's a bike and a lift, or, you know, some kind of monostructural cardio piece and some movement, you know, accessory work. But, you know, the bottom line is, I think one of the most important things I start doing is I really start to listen to my desire to train. Do I want to train today? Yes or no? And what it turns out is that I usually have a very high let's go train drive. That's a signal in my brain. And when it's not there, I think to myself, am I missing it? Why don't I want to train today? Maybe I'll go train. But I listen to that voice, and what it turns out is that my brain is telling me I need a rest day or off. So on the rest days, there's sauna, there's walking, there's eating better, there's meditation. The thing is that just think of this globally as a physical practice that doesn't have any edges.
Okay, Dominic wants to know just that. How much struggle is okay in training? Like if he goes to the box 5 times a week and he always gives 100 and 105%, it's pretty hard to keep up with it. So he's asking for the good classic week with technique and strength training that you can hopefully follow for a long time.
Well, what's great again is, you know, if I say I need you to show up 7 days a week, I know you can do that, right? So the 3 days on, 1 day off doesn't work for everyone. 5 days on, 2 days off doesn't work for everyone. Maybe you have to, you know, your weekends are so busy that you have to do it on the 5 days. So, you know, really the key is, how would I begin to recognize when I was under recovered? Or so resting heart rate is a great one. Understanding heart rate variability might be another piece. Looking at sleep quality may be another piece. So if I'm really trying to train at the peak, then I'm going to have to be really good about nutrition, really good about my sleep. You're going to have to, like, let me be clear for everyone. If you are sleeping less than 7 hours a night, you are not sleeping. You are a stressed animal. 7 hours or less. I see you over there, Helena. And the idea is 8 hours is our minimum, which means you may need to be in bed for an extra hour to get the 8 hours of sleep. So anything under 7 hours, we think is survival. 7 hours is survival. Fantastic. You're survival. You're hitting your minimum. But again, I guarantee you think you're training really hard, but you're not. And you're not actually getting the gains you are managing training hard 5 days a week. And then one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of periodization and periodizing things, there's things where we need to work on a block for a while or to focus on a skill. That's not periodization. Is that there's too many variables. Your life, your nutrition, going out, doing a little Saufen with the friends, right? It's so easy to be behind a little bit. And so what will happen is go train, and some days are just not going to be very heavy or hard days. Your intensity isn't there. don't worry about it. So on days, if you love to train 5 days a week because it's your sport club, it's your friends, you love to move, you're a nerd, I'm with you, I believe you. But some days, tell your coach, hey, I'm just not very great today, and I'm just gonna move efficiently. Don't try to win. If you try to win every day, I guarantee you your technique is crap, your recovery is crap, your nutrition is crap, you just can't do it. So some people have incredible genetics who can handle really high volumes of real high intensity, but they also have really strong intrinsic movers or awareness about their feelings so that they know on today. Because what I'm saying is when you need a day off because heart rate is high, sleep recovery is high, recovery score is low, et cetera, then what you can do is you can still move that day. You just don't need to go smash yourself that day.
Okay, and Valerie saw your some advertisement for your 14-day split challenge.
Oh.
And she would like to know which benefits you assign to that movement specifically.
So what we said is in the piece, and first of all, this is a great question. Is it der, die, das? Is it die splits? Is it der splits? How would you say this?
Das Spagat.
Das Spagat.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it, but do you always say Spagat or do you say das Spagat? Because in America, we always say the splits. We never say nur Spagat. And is that like Spagat, like spaghetti?
I don't know if I think we put the Nam in front of it.
You always do this das Spagat. So here's the deal. I don't think being able to do the splits is important. What I think is having long lever control in these positions of hip flexion, of hip extension, of hip abduction, being able to have the control in your range and having more movement choice is important. And what you'll see is that there's very little time spent developing capacity in these long lever leg shaped positions unless you do gymnastics, unless you do Pilates, unless you do yoga. And there's a reason that a lot of athletes struggle with yoga, for example, is because yoga spends so much time in these long lever positions. Yes, you can fold over, but can you fold over with your legs straight? Can you, do some kind of middle split? So, I don't care if you can touch your toes. I care that you have more hip flexion that's available to you when your legs are straight at the same time in these pike-like positions. So again, we focus on trying to improve and restore people's hip extension, but you have to be able to extend the hip with the leg straight. You have to be able to flex the hip with the leg straight. And what you'll see is that you'll have more movement choice and be able to solve more movement problems if we develop that one aspect of your range of motion. So what we've done is I've given us sort of 3 important positions: the forward fold pike position, which is a long sit, because most people can't even long sit at all, right? With their legs out in front of them, like doing a glute ham sit up. Their hamstrings are stiff, so they don't even have base range of motion. 2 is being able to get into a lunge position, right? Which is, taking the front leg into flexion, the other leg into extension. And the reason that's important is that's sport, that's running, that's Olympic lifting. And what we see is that people have terrible hip extension and then terrible abduction. This is why we program squatting side to side. Those Cossack squats are important of part of our programming because we're making sure that we're touching the tissues in all their ranges. So doing the splits is not important. Having more control in some of these base positions is crucial. Das Spagat.
Das Spagat. And then we have 2 questions regarding your sleep. Are you using any device to track your sleep quality? And then Philip is asking if you have some sort of routine a highly stressed out person could do before going to bed to make sure they get quality sleep.
It's a great question. The first is I don't track my sleep because my wife tracks her sleep. So, I sleep with an eye mask. It's very dark. I sleep when it's very cold. I have something that circulates cold water underneath my sheet all night long. It's called a chili pad. So my bed is 17 degrees C all the time. It's very cold. And so I sleep when it's cold and dark. I don't drink caffeine after 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So all caffeine is done. So I don't drink alcohol very often. If you and I go out and have schnapps or something, it's very rare. It's a celebration, but I don't drink You know, if we do drink, honestly, we drink like Sportbier because we see it as it's a ritual and fun. But what we find is that the alcohol really messes up the sleep. And that's something that I can't play with very much as I get older. So I do a lot of things to really protect my sleep. And if I'm feeling very stressed out, we always encourage people to do our 10 to 15 minutes of soft tissue work before they go to bed. So in incorporating the long exhales, incorporating the soft tissue down regulation, we call that on the website daily maintenance. And what we encourage people to do is do the daily maintenance, the soft tissue rolling before they go to bed, because it helps them to fall asleep and stay asleep. So, you know, we're seeing that people are really working, they're doing a lot of self-medicating. I think you would call it das Gras. We see a lot of people using marijuana and THC to fall asleep and CBD. They're using alcohol to downregulate and stress. And what we think is those things may help you fall asleep, but you need to prove to yourself that if you're using Ambien, alcohol, THC, right, all of these things can affect the quality of your sleep. And we want to make sure that you're really keeping an eye on these things and tracking that. So for us, we see all of these things as tools, and people will reach for whatever tool they have. If you have a sauna, you'll see that it's really difficult to not fall asleep if you've been in the sauna and you break yourself with heat. If you've walked during the day, if you limit your caffeine consumption, if you if you have a routine, I think it really helps you to prepare the bed. So, you know, 2 hours, you know, or an hour before you go to bed, alarm should go off and tell you, get off all your screens, turn the lights down, start to prepare the brain for sleep. You know, maybe have a warm drink, some kinds of things, start to get yourself ready, do some soft tissue work. And what you'll see is that your brain is really good at identifying patterns. So when you start to do the same thing every night, that alarm will start to tell your brain, we are getting ready to go to bed. So do you go to bed at the same time every night? Do you wake up at the same time? These are all the same things around sleep hygiene.
Okay. We have one more question about a motocross race and a broken spine and shitty shoulders. She is still struggling to get more mobility into what I understand, especially her upper back. And she wants to know if you have any magic tricks to help her get some of the mobility back.
The first thing I would say is very much the breathing practice is important. And then see if you can't challenge that breathing idea, the Wim Hof idea. You know, when we practice Wim Hof, we're getting a ton of motion into the thoracic spine, and in ways that we can't do just by mobilizing through the thoracic spine, right? So, you know, we can then, so the breathing practice to the upper back, and then you can start to add positions to it. So you can start to do Wim Hof while you're in a flex position. You can start to do some Wim Hof cycles when you're hanging from the bar. You can start to do Wim Hof while you're laying on a roller. And suddenly what you're seeing is that, for example, if you go to the ready state, you'll see that we spend a lot of time working on breathing in and out and having breath control at these limits of range of motion. So I need to make sure that if I'm laying on a peanut to try to open up my back, that I can take a maximal breath in there, and I can look at what that joint and tissue system is doing when I have no air in there. And so what we normally see is that people begin to try to mobilize their spines and then have this little tiny breathing window. So they're not actually using range of motion of the upper back. The second thing that always gets missed when we're talking about the back is range of motion of the shoulder. So we have to look at the shoulder, neck, and thoracic spine as a trifecta. These are relationships. So if my shoulder is missing internal rotation, then it's going to be forward, and it doesn't matter what I do, I will never have the stability through my back. So remember, our model is that we create a chassis, some kind of frame off of which the big engine can work and be powerful. But then the body also creates a lot of stability off of the engine. So these are reciprocating stability. If I grab something, then this is how my body becomes stable off of the fixed arm. So I have to have full range of motion in the body of the engines of the shoulder if I want to have normative range of motion in the thoracic spine. Those are really crucially important. And then look, you know, one of the things is that, you know, when we're recovering from injury or recovering from trauma, we have to be a little bit more clever, making sure that we're challenging the vestibular system, working on balance. These things, you know, the things of the neuroathletic population or Z health are really easy to integrate into some of our basic warm-up game training. We don't have to stop training hard, but if we've had injury to the nervous system, then we need to make sure that as we're warming up, we can turn your neck. We're warming up that you can look up and down. There's just so many ways to improve posture and alignment through the things we're already doing. You don't have to do a bunch of other things. Do the things you're already doing and then integrate some more sort of sensory ideas. But what remember is that you'll always default to your training. So we have to really work on some of those training ideas. Great question. It's very complicated, but also easier than you think.
Along with those 3 tips that you should have given yourself 10 years ago, simple life fixes, somebody asked for 5 book recommendations.
Whew, man, I'll tell you what, I can't really say that. What the most important coaching book I read last year was a history of a guy named Anson Dorrance, and it's called The Man Watching. And he was the women's soccer coach, women's football coach at the University of North Carolina. And he basically created women's American soccer and helped develop the Women's World Cup. He's the most successful coach in American history. And listening to him, the biography of how he learned to coach athletes and women and develop his program is really important. It's an important work around understanding the sort of the person and that coaching teaching relationship. You know, I read everything. I'd say I already point you at both of Franz Bosch's books. Those are definitely worth reading. You know, I think there's a classic old book called The Body Keeps the Score. Reading some book about pain science or the brain is definitely worthwhile looking at. You know, I probably have 4 or 5 books going right now. So I'm always reading.
And then maybe you want to tell us where everybody needs to get your app.
Well, we are at The Ready State. So we used to be called Mobility WOD, but now we're The Ready State. And what's interesting is that I encourage everyone, we have a 2-week free membership where you can try out what's going on. Jump into the splits challenge, Das Spagat challenge, and let me know how that goes. It starts next Monday. And you can see how I program, how I think, play around with the site. And then again, it's 2 weeks of on-ramp. And then we also have, even for your own members or your own self, we have 2-week challenges around the ankle and foot. We have 2-week challenges around the hip. So in the site, there's a ton there. But definitely come to Instagram, The Ready State, come to YouTube, check out how we coach and teach.
All right. Somebody was asking if you have a blue light filter in your glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's time to wrap it up, guys.
Yeah, I think we got it. Somebody now asked if you can recommend a mattress.
No.
Yeah, that's a good question. I love that one. I
tell you what, I think, this is what I'll say is go to the mattress shop and lay on the mattress for 20 minutes. And you will know if it's a good mattress for you or not. If you start to fidget and have to cross your legs or adopt a different position, it may not be the right mattress. I think you should be able to sleep on any surface. But I think the older, sort of more modern humans are a little bit more extension sensitive. And so I think in our athletic population, a little bit softer mattress has people be a little bit more towards flexion while they sleep. This may not be for the fat old guy, but for the young hotness who is again doing so much extension activity, sleeping in a little bit softer, more flexed position, almost like a hammock in your mattress, may make your back feel better. But entirely subjective.
Maybe that will just be our next project. Create the perfect mattress.
That's right.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I know it's the evening there. I think it's the season of Glühwein, so please have some Glühwein for me. I don't know if anyone still drinks Glühwein, but I miss the Christkindlmarkt. I miss the Lebkuchen. Obviously, I have an affinity for all things snacks in Germany.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any Christmas markets this year.
Oh.
They're all been canceled.
It's just abashada. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, once again, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
very
Kelly.
much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tschüss.
Ciao, mein Lieber.
Tschüss.
Jetzt sind wir wieder unter uns. Dann waren sie wieder allein.
Jetzt geht es so schnell runter mit der Zahl, wie es vorhin hochging.
Ich habe es gerade gesehen, ja.
Wumm.
Sehr schön hat er das gemacht. Genau.
Das hat er sehr schön gemacht, ja. Ziemlich interessant.
Goedewel. Der Dominik.
Eine Person in der Warteschlange.
Echt? iPhone möchte noch mal reinkommen. Den
Lass ihn doch mal rein und sag, hey, der kommt bestimmt gleich.
Wir warten noch.
Wir warten noch. Hat sich ein bisschen verspätet. Hat was mit der Zeitverschiebung zu tun.
Ja, hat aber alles super geklappt, ne? Kann man nichts sagen.
Nee, war gut.
So ein bisschen nervös war ich schon, muss ich ehrlich gestehen.
Kommt noch jemand?
Noch jemand? Niki, schon wieder.
Gibt es jetzt noch ein Seminar? Habe ich irgendwas verpasst?
Weiß nicht, Raul, was hast du noch vor?
Was wollt ihr? Wir machen alles für euch.
Ich bin ja dafür, dass die jetzt reinkommen, sich vorstellen und einen guten Grund nennen müssen, warum sie jetzt erst kommen.
Ja, fangen wir mit dem iPhone an.
Ist der noch da? Nee, der ist gar nicht mehr da.
iPhone und Niki, beide da, beide nicht stumm geschaltet, können erklären, warum sie jetzt erst kommen.
Genau, auf geht's. iPhone, Niki. iPhone, hier, ihr zwei. Wieso kommt der jetzt erst? Schweigen geht nicht. Ihr seid eingeschaltet und wir wollen was von euch hören. iPhone und Niki, wieso kommt der jetzt erst?
Zack, iPhone wieder weg.
So, Niki, jetzt.
Niki, jetzt bist du dran.
Und Niki wieder weg.
Nee, Niki ist noch da. Niki ist noch da.
Ah, Niki ist noch da.
Also wer seinen Bildschirm immer noch abgeschaltet hat, wir schmeißen jetzt alle ohne Bildschirm raus.
Genau, und dann holen wir die Flasche Rotwein,
Also das sage ich dir. Jetzt geht's ab.
Nein, noch Glühwein.
damit wir
Aber
besser
das ist ja
schlafen.
wenigstens mal sichtbar.
Ja, ich finde auch.
Die Drohung hat gewirkt.
Aber ich finde das furchtbar, wenn man immer vor diesem Rechner sitzt und alle haben auf dunkel geschaltet.
Ja, deswegen. Nehmen wir jetzt raus. Eure letzte Chance. Einschalten, sonst schmeißen wir euch raus. Oder wir nehmen euch sanft aus dem Call.
Und dann verpasst ihr das Beste des Abends.
Das würde ich gar nicht erst erzählen. Das war alles nur mit Kelly, das war nur das Vorspiel.
Wie viele waren wir jetzt zur höchsten Zeit? Hat jemand mal drauf
Ich
geguckt?
glaube 106 oder so.
Ja, 107 habe ich gesehen
Nee,
zwischendurch.
waren mehr sogar. Waren 115 oder so zwischendurch.
Krass.
Aber weniger, als ich erwartet hätte, ehrlich gesagt.
Ja.
Also vielleicht war es für viele ein bisschen früh. Für mich war das auch tatsächlich eine Herausforderung, so früh irgendwie. Aber
Ja. Aber ich finde, sowas sollte man schon versuchen, irgendwie möglich zu machen. Das ist auch schon interessant, weil normalerweise, wenn so jemand von so einem Kaliber einen Vortrag hält, dann kostet das richtig Geld, ne? Also wer zu so einem Seminar geht, der muss tief in die Tasche greifen. Also es war schon wirklich ein ziemliches Privileg, dabei sein zu dürfen.
ja, vor allem normalerweise kommst du ja gar nicht dazu, Fragen zu stellen. Du kannst da sitzen, kannst zuhören und dir was mitschreiben, aber irgendwie deine Fragen stellen kannst du normalerweise nicht. Also ich fand das schon ziemlich cool.
Ja, absolut.
Ja, die letzten Fragen waren wirklich die geilsten. Hat deine Brille einen Blaufilter und welche Matratze nutzt du? Das musst du echt geben. Ja.
So, bei Audible Wim Hof Methode runtergeladen.
Sehr gut.
So, jetzt morgens immer 3 Minuten irgendwo ins Bächle reinsteigen und frieren und atmen.
Eigentlich ist das ganze Ding hier auch dieser zweite Lockdown ist ja nur voller Herausforderungen, ne, wenn du das mal so siehst, wie wir unser ganzes Leben hier anpassen. Jetzt machen wir machen jetzt gemeinsam Beyond the Whiteboard, Wim Hof Methode.
Hast du angefangen einzutragen?
Wir atmen noch nicht. Ich mache heute Abend mein Workout und dann muss ich eintragen.
Ich habe für die nächsten 2 Tage schon vorgeschrieben. Nicht den Score, sondern
so,
nur die Watts.
Genau. Achso, okay. Der Score wäre lustig, genau.
Ja, das wäre praktisch, ne?
Ja.
Sowas hätte ich denn gern.
Genau.
So, jetzt kriegen Raul und Torben mal Post von mir.
Post kriegen wir?
Ich will hier noch nichts veröffentlichen, was nicht spruchreif ist.
Nacktbilder?
Die sind spruchreif. Das ist
Ja, super.
So wird jetzt unser Gequatsche auch noch aufgenommen?
So,
Sicher.
jetzt könnten wir abbrechen, oder? Jetzt.
Nee, jetzt wird es doch gerade interessant.